You have probably had a bad day at an airport, a long line, a delayed flight, a lost bag, a cold sandwich that cost way too much money. Annoying, yes, but not dangerous. Now picture a different kind of bad day. A runway that ends before the plane can safely stop. A fire truck that cannot reach a burning aircraft fast enough to matter. A pilot who looks at the landing in front of him, knows it is risky, and does it anyway, because saying no could end his career. This is not a movie. This is not history. This is happening right now at airports that are still open, still selling tickets, still landing full planes today. By the end of this video, you are going to know exactly where these airports are, why they made this list, and the real evidence behind every single one. But before we get into it, hit subscribe, because once you see what is on this list, you are going to want to see what else is out there, and trust me, this list is just the beginning. Now let us talk about how safe flying actually is. The numbers are incredible. Out of every million flights in the world, almost none end in a fatal accident. That is one of the greatest safety achievements in human history. Engineers spent decades making air travel one of the safest things a person can do. But here is the problem. That safety record is not the same everywhere. There is a global system meant to check airports around the world and make sure they meet basic safety rules. And many airports have failed those checks again and again, year after year. Instead of being shut down, they were given more time, more warnings, more documents that said the problem was being looked into. The 5 airports in this video are not abandoned. They are not from some old story your grandfather told you. Real planes, full of real people, are landing there this week, maybe even right now, while you are watching this. This is not a video about plane crashes. This is a video about the gap between what the safety certificate on the wall says and what is actually happening on the runway. Stay with me, because number 1 on this list is going to shock you. Princess Juliana International Airport sits on the Dutch side of Sint Maarten and handles about 1.8 million passengers a year. What makes it stand out isn't how it's run, it's how it was laid out. The main runway is roughly 7,546 feet long, and at one end of it sits Maho Beach, a public beach separated from the runway by nothing more than a road and a fence. Because of that, landing aircraft pass so low overhead that people standing on the beach can see the wheels. And the problem isn't only at that end. The opposite end of the runway borders a lagoon, leaving little margin if a plane ever overran it. That closeness has already turned deadly. In July 2017, a tourist holding the beach fence was killed by jet blast from a departing plane, thrown into a concrete wall, echoing a similar non-fatal incident there in 2012. 2 months later, Hurricane Irma destroyed the terminal, yet the airport was rebuilt with the same runway and approach, and the beach stayed open, still part of its draw today. Part of why nothing's changed is that international safety ratings apply to a country's aviation authority, not individual airports. So this specific layout falls outside what they're designed to catch. Verdict: the danger here was never a one-off event. It's built into the layout, and the layout hasn't changed. Toncontín International Airport, serving Tegucigalpa, Honduras, tells a similar story, except here the warning came first in writing. The airport sits in a valley about 3,294 feet above sea level, ringed by hills up to 7,500 feet. Its runway is just over 6,600 feet long, and the terrain forces a steep, low turn just before touchdown, with the city below. That exact combination, short runway, tight turn mountains, city, is what investigators flagged after May 2008, when an Airbus A320 landed long and fast on a wet runway, overran the end, and broke apart on a road below, killing 5 people, 3 on board, including the pilot, and 2 on the ground. Despite that warning, the airport kept operating at full capacity for 13 more years. Around 5 million passengers a year, On major airlines, same runway, same approach. What finally changed wasn't a redesign. In October 2021, Honduras opened a new international airport nearby with a longer runway and safer terrain, and international flights moved there within months. Toncontín still operates, but only domestic flights now, on the same runway it always had. Verdict: the 2008 crash already spelled out the problem. The fix that came 13 years later wasn't fixing this airport. It was building another one. Lukla's danger comes from terrain that can't be changed. Barra's comes from a surface that isn't even solid ground to begin with. Tenzing-Hillary Airport in Lukla, Nepal, is the gateway to the Everest region, and one of the most dangerous airports in the world, not because of underfunding, but because of what's physically there. The runway is just 1,729 feet long, sitting at about 9,334 feet elevation, with a mountain wall at one end and a steep drop at the other. It's built on a roughly 12% uphill slope, which is what slows landing aircraft down since the runway is too short for normal braking, and takeoffs run downhill for the same reason. There's no go-around option. Once a pilot commits to landing, that's it. The airport only flies in clear visual conditions, so fog can ground everything for days. That lack of margin has cost lives. 18 of 19 killed in a 2008 crash on approach, 2 pilots killed in a 2017 crash short of the runway, and 3 killed in 2019 when a plane veered off during takeoff into parked helicopters. The airport still operates exactly as before. It's the only practical access point for the region, and a safer, lower elevation replacement has been discussed for years without going anywhere. Barra Airport, in Scotland's Outer Hebrides, is the only airport in the world where scheduled flights land on a tidal beach. 3 runways are marked out on the sand at Tre Mhor, usable only when the tide is out. The flight schedule is built around the tide table. Loganair flies a small Twin Otter here, with pilots specially trained for it, since there's no runway, lighting, or instrument approach possible on a surface that disappears twice a day. It's still operating today, and it's not going anywhere. It's the main lifeline for about 1,200 islanders, with the only alternative being a long ferry ride. That need is exactly why an airport that runs on a beach has never been upgraded or replaced. Agatti Aerodrome is the only airport serving the Lakshadweep Islands, a small group of islands off the southwest coast of India, about 460 kilometers from the mainland. To understand why it's on this list, picture the island itself first. It's only about 5 kilometers long and less than 2 kilometers wide at its widest point. That's the entire piece of land the airport has to work with. The runway is about 4,000 feet long. For comparison, that's short. Most large passenger jets need closer to 6,000 to 8,000 feet or more. Because of this, only small regional turboprop planes can land here, mainly the ATR-72, which carries around 70 passengers. Even those planes run into trouble sometimes. Depending on how hot it is and how much fuel is on board, the math for a safe takeoff doesn't always work out for a full plane. So passengers have actually been bumped flights because the aircraft was too heavy to safely take off on this runway in those conditions. Now think about what's at either end of that runway. At most airports, there's a cleared, flat safety buffer beyond the runway in case a plane lands too fast, too far down the runway, or has a brake problem on takeoff. At Agatti, there isn't really one. The runway simply ends, and the sea is right there. If a plane ever ran off either end, it would go into the water. The way into the airport is also unusual. Planes approach Agatti flying over open ocean. In hazy or low visibility conditions, there's nothing for pilots to see. No coastline, no hills, no landmarks. Until the island itself suddenly appears below them. Pilots rely almost entirely on satellite-based navigation systems to fly this approach safely, because there's nothing to look at outside the window for much of it. And if something does go wrong mid-flight, bad weather, a technical issue, a medical emergency on board, there isn't really a nearby backup option. The closest alternate airport is on the mainland, which is a significant distance for a small turboprop that doesn't carry a huge amount of extra fuel. On the ground, Agatti Island has a population of around 7,000 people. If a plane were ever to have an accident involving the runway or the water around it, the island's fire and rescue capability has been pointed out by aviation safety researchers as not meeting the level that's normally expected for this category of aircraft. In plain terms, if something serious happened here, the island doesn't have the equipment or resources that a similar-sized airport on the mainland would have. Here's the part that makes this airport especially relevant right now. In 2024, Lakshadweep suddenly became a major tourist destination after a wave of public attention and media coverage. Almost overnight, far more people wanted to fly there than ever before. But the airport didn't and couldn't instantly expand to handle that. The runway is still the same length, the same planes are still the only ones that can land, and the same restrictions on weight and weather still apply. There is a plan to extend the runway out over the lagoon to make it longer and allow bigger planes, but that work takes years, and for now, nothing about how the airport actually operates has changed. Today, it's served by Air India's regional service flying ATR 72s in from Kochi. Same runway, same limits, just a lot more people trying to use it. So, in simple terms, Agatti is a short runway with the sea on both ends, on a tiny island with weak emergency backup that was already operating close to its limits, and is now being asked to handle far more traffic than before, with no quick way to make it bigger or safer. Now, here's what ties all 5 airports in this list together, in the simplest way possible. Each one has an obvious, well-known weak spot. Princess Juliana has a tourist beach right at the end of its runway, with planes flying low overhead. Toncontín has a short runway in a valley that requires a sharp, risky turn just before landing, and it already had a fatal crash tied directly to that setup. Lukla has a runway carved into a mountainside with no room to abort a landing once you've committed. Barra's runway is literally a beach that disappears underwater twice a day, and Agatti is a thin strip of land surrounded by sea with no safety buffer at either end. In every one of these cases, the problem wasn't a secret. People wrote about it, studied it, and in some cases formally recommended fixes. Sometimes years before anything bad happened, and in Toncontín's case, even after something bad had already happened once. But none of these airports were shut down or completely redesigned because of that. They kept operating, often busier than before, because shutting them down or rebuilding them would be expensive, difficult, or unpopular. They're often the only way in or out for the people who live there, or they're tied to tourism money that local governments don't want to lose. So the simple takeaway is this: just because an airport is approved or certified doesn't mean its biggest risks have been fixed. It often just means the risks are known, accepted, and managed day to day instead. The people who actually deal with that risk are the passengers getting on the plane, while the decisions about whether to fix it, leave it, or expand it anyway are made by people who aren't on board. Yet every day, pilots, controllers, and ground crews work together to navigate these challenges and keep air travel moving safely. It's a reminder that aviation safety is often about managing risk, not eliminating it completely. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like the video, hit the subscribe button, and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on future aviation deep dives. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.